While declaring the field, you can use either of the 6 access modifiers. Let us understand those access modifiers now. Access modifier is a field in C# that specifies the visibility or accessibility of the particular member of the class. That means it will specify where the particular member, that means where the field is accessible. It specifies whether the field is accessible in other classes or not. Overall, we have 5 possible locations, that is in the same class, in the child classes at same assembly, in other classes of the same assembly, child classes at other assembly, and other classes at other assembly. The child class is a class which is derived from the class where the actual fields are declared. And assembly is the compiled file of the project. So you can consider that one assembly for one project. In our existing application, we have 2 projects in the same solution, so we can consider there are 2 assemblies. That is, fields_example.exe is one assembly and class library1.dll is another assembly. Yes, class libraries are compiled as a DLL file and that DLL file is called as assembly. Console application is compiled as exe file, even that is also another assembly. So let us consider the product class. And let us create a child class for the product class. For example, domestic product is a special type of product class. So in this example, product is a parent and domestic product is a child of the product type, which means that domestic product is of product type basically. By default, all the fields of the parent class are inherited into the child class. That means if you create an object for the child class, that is domestic product, in that object, all these fields get stored. So you can create a child class in the same assembly, that is within the class library project itself. You can also create the child classes in other assemblies, that is in the console application project. For example, we are creating a child class called international product in the console application project, which is different than the class library project. So we have 2 child classes for the product class. One is within the same assembly, that is in the same project, and the second child class is in the other assembly, that is in the console application. And similarly, you can create other classes in the same assembly as well as in other assembly also. So in the console application also, we are going to create other class. So these are the additional classes we have declared just for demonstration of the access modifiers. We may remove these classes by the next lecture. Now let us start going through these access modifiers. The private access modifier is accessible within the same class only. They are not accessible in child classes of the same assembly or anywhere else. But it doesn't mean that if you create an object of the class in other assemblies, the private fields will not be stored in that object. When you create an object, irrespective of the access modifier, all types of fields get stored in the object. But here the point is whether the field is accessible in other classes or not. You cannot prevent a field from being stored in the object. For example, product ID is a private field. So this private field, that is product ID, is accessible within the same class only, but not accessible in other classes such as domestic product or other class, or even in the international product or other class also. So in any of these classes, the private field is not accessible. I am writing a method temporarily. I will explain about methods in detail in further sections. So in the method 1, I am trying to access the private field of the parent class, that is product ID. It is not accessible because it was private to the product class itself. So this code is not valid. Now coming to the protected field. The protected field is accessible in three cases, that is, in the same class, in the child class of the same assembly, and in the child class of the other assembly. In the remaining two cases, they are not accessible. That is, other class of the same assembly and other class of the other assembly. So we are talking about product class. If it is having a protected member, this protected member is accessible within the same class only and also in the corresponding child classes in any assembly. So can we access the product name here? Yes, we can access the product name because it is protected. So accessible in the child class of the same assembly. So we can store any value in the product name field because it is accessible in the child class of the same assembly. But can we access the protected field in other classes of the same assembly? No, they are not accessible. Actually, in other class, you require to create object of the class, then only you can access public field. So I am creating an object because we are not in a child class. See, by writing the reference variable, that is product, you cannot access the private field or protected field because the protected field is not accessible in other classes of the same assembly. So the private field is not accessible here, even the protected field also not accessible. Now let us try the same in other assembly. So we are coming back to console application. This is the other assembly. In this assembly also we try to access the private field, so it is not accessible. But protected member is accessible because this is the child class of the product class. So even without creating any object, directly we can access the protected member of the parent class, but not the private member. Now let us try the same in other class of the other assembly. So both of these members are not accessible because the protected member is accessible only in the child classes but not in other classes. Now coming to private protected, it is a newly introduced C# access modifier. The private protected is a combination of private and protected also. So as a private, it is accessible within the same class only, and also as a protected, it is accessible in the child class of the same assembly. But private protected field is not accessible in other classes of the same assembly or entirely in the other assembly. So the private protected is accessible only in these two cases. Suppose I am declaring the cost as a private protected. In that case, this cost is accessible in the same class. In fact, in the same class, all types of members are accessible. And also, you can access the same in the child class of the same assembly. But you cannot access them in other class of the same assembly. So cost is equal to 2000. It is not valid because the cost is not accessible due to its protection level. In the same way, in other assembly, it is not accessible at all. So in the child class of other assembly, it is not accessible. And in other class of the other assembly, it is not accessible also. Now coming to internal access modifier. The internal access modifier is accessible in three possible locations, that is, in the same class, in the child class of the same assembly, in other class of the same assembly. Overall, it is accessible everywhere in the same assembly, but it is not accessible entirely in other assembly. Suppose now I am making the cost as internal member. So in that case, by default it is accessible within the same class, and also it is accessible in the child class of the same assembly, and also it is accessible at other class of the same assembly. So overall in the same assembly always it is accessible. But it is not at all accessible in other assembly. So we are in the console application now. Even in the child class or in the other class also it is not accessible at all. Now coming to protected internal. The protected internal is a combination of protected and internal also. So as protected, it is accessible in the same class and in the child class at same assembly or in the child class at other assemblies. And also it is accessible in other class of the same assembly just like internal. So it is not accessible only in one case, that is other class at other assemblies. Suppose I am converting the cost as protected internal. So it is accessible always in the same assembly, that is including the child class of the same assembly. So the cost is accessible here, and also in the other class of the same assembly. So the cost also accessible here. And in the same way, the protected internal member is accessible in the child class at other assemblies also. So the cost is accessible here because it is protected internal and it is a child class at other assembly. But only in one case it is not accessible, that is other class at other assembly. So this is other class at other assembly, and this is child class at other assembly, and this is other class at same assembly, and this is child class at same assembly. Now coming to the last type of access modifier, that is public. Unconditionally, public member is accessible everywhere. So in the same class, in the child classes, in other classes, everywhere it is unrestrictedly accessible. So already the quantity in stock member is public, so we can access them in all the locations. So I can access here, that is in the child class of same assembly, and I can also access the same here through the reference variable, that is at other class of the same assembly, and also I can access the same here, that is child class at other assembly, and also I can access the same here, that is other class of the other assembly. So these are the available access modifiers. In fact, the same access modifiers are applicable for other type of members of the class, that is method, property, event, etc. So overall summarizing, private is accessible in the same class only, protected is accessible in the same class and the child classes only, private protected is accessible in the same class and the child class of the same assembly, internal member is accessible in the same assembly only but not in other assemblies, protected internal member is accessible in the same assembly and also in the child class of other assembly, and public member is accessible always in all the locations. This is understanding of access modifiers of fields.